Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all doing well and keeping safe. My name is Dr. Nandini Seth, and I'm very, very excited to welcome Mr. Pankaj Rai here with us today. Thank you, Mr. Rai, for joining us at Masters Union. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, thanks, Nandini.
Mr. Rai is currently the Group Chief Data and Analytics Officer with Aditya Birla Group, and he has over 25 years of experience across diverse domains and various multinationals like Wells Fargo, Dell, Stancy, just to name a few. And I am gonna ask him a few questions that I want to know from him, and then we're gonna open the house for questions. As I was just mentioning, I see a lot of my current students, and I know how inquisitive they are. So, for all the students and participants who are joining in, even outside Masters Union, if you have any questions to ask Mr. Rai, please drop them in the Q&A section below. And what we'll do is we will try to map the pace of our conversation in accordance to how many questions we have. So if we feel like we're getting a lot of questions, I'm going to keep my bit shorter, and so that we can answer some of these questions. Yeah. So okay, fine, Mr. Rai, let's begin. Ready?
Yeah, it's like those 20 questions, coffee with Karan.
I don't have 20, I promise.
Okay.
So to begin with, Mr. Rai, you've had quite a journey so far. I'd love for everybody to get to know you a little better, to tell us something about your journey, especially since you pivoted into analytics. I think around 2005, 2007 is when you decided to sort of pivot here. How has it been, and what were the different companies, different roles that you took over, and something about you?
I think, as we say in the field of data analytics, that data is actually dumb when we have to find a story within that data. So while some of you can see my LinkedIn profile and see a lot of data on what it says, let me try and put some story behind it. And I think this story will not be very different from many other stories of my generation. And I think this generation is the next one. So, so this would be their parents' generation, which is that opportunities those days were few. And most parents would ask children to become either doctor or engineer. I think everyone has heard that story. So I was no different. My dad was an engineer who had gone to IIT Bombay. So he felt that his children should also become engineers and also from IIT because that's where he went. So me and my brother were from a very young age coached and forced to make sure that we make it to IIT. So I think both of us did that. And in fact, both of us studied electrical engineering in IIT Delhi. My dad was in mechanical from IIT Bombay. So I always tell people that this engineering degree was not because of me, but because my dad made sure that we did that. Not just told us, but made sure he taught us and made sure that we made it to this school and so on. And then of course he left us alone because he felt okay, he's done his job. I being the older child, I looked at what I should do next. Most people in those days used to go abroad and do a master's in engineering. And when I started writing these statements of purpose, I realized that I had no interest even in bachelor's, forget master's. That was my dad's interest. So I stopped writing those SOPs and applying abroad. Thankfully, I got admission to an MBA school in Ahmedabad. And the reason I say thankfully was that MBA schools from then onwards to now always have a group discussion and an interview and so forth. And I was pretty quiet person, and I didn't know how I can talk in a big group. So I never spoke in any GD. And the only place, which is Ahmedabad, which said that there is no GD, all of you get 2 minutes to speak. So that's the only call I get. So I can associate my admission to the fact that I didn't have to speak in a group, and I made it. So given that was the only option, I took that. And then after that, we all know that we don't have too many options. After you've done an MBA, you have to finally take up a job. So then you go for the campus interviews. My job was a company called Feedback Ventures, which came on day 4. By the time you get to day 4 on IIM, you get very worried that will you even get a job or not. So there used to be placements used to go up to day 7 or 8, and by the 4th day, most people were like, so I took up this job, which came my way. And then the other job, by the way, I had to sell bulbs in Wipro. And I said, I can't sell bulbs in Wipro, which was Wipro Consumer Care, by the way. And I thought this consulting seems better than the other one. And I picked this one up. After a couple of years in consulting, I felt that I could do something else because a friend of mine who was in ICICI told me that this consulting, you guys give a lot of gyan, but you don't know what's going on. Why don't you come to ICICI where we give money? but then we make sure that we know what's going on because you have to get the money back. So I thought, yeah, that sounds like a sound advice that gyan is free and money is not. So maybe you learn more when you give money. So I joined ICICI thanks to him. In fact, the person who interviewed and hired was Sandeep Bakshi, who is now the MD of the company. So great place, learned a lot across industries and across businesses. I think the commercial element of business was good over there. And then people used to aspire to work in multinational companies in those days. I think even probably now a bit. So many people used to go to Citibank or HSBC or Peregrine or things like that. So I ended up going to G Capital because someone from ICICI had gone there and said, "Hey, you know what? I've come here. You come over here. This is a good place to work for. More money, better exposure, all that kind of stuff." So I followed them. And G had gotten into this offshoring business, which is now called Genpact. So then again, there was someone who had gone from GE to set up Standard Chartered's back office center in Chennai called Scope. So I followed him based on his advice that the next big thing after banking will be this whole offshoring. So I said, okay, if you say so. So I went there, and from there on, I went to Singapore where they were again doing some more work in Stanchart in Kuala Lumpur, and they wanted me to be in Singapore. And then the same gentleman came to Dell in Bangalore in 2005 and said, "Hey, now why didn't you come to Dell? I'm setting up something new here." And I said, "Okay, if you say so." So that's how I landed up in Dell. And a couple of years later, he left and someone else came in and he said, "Why don't you do data analytics? This is the next field which is going to come up." And I said, "Okay, if you say so." That's how I spent 8, 9 years in Dell doing data analytics. And then some people had moved on to Wells Fargo and they said, "This is a big US bank," which frankly I had not heard of. It's a big bank, but somehow it isn't something which was very well known. And they said, "Why don't you look it up on Google?" And which I did. And I said, "Oh, that's a pretty large bank and they're setting up. So maybe I can go there." So I went there, followed them 5.5 years there. And then 6 months ago, or rather 5 months ago, a friend of mine who was in the Aditya Birla Group called Deep Thomas, he was moving out and he said, "I've set up this team 3 years ago and I think it's a great place. You can come over here and work here." So I took his advice. So the common theme in this whole data that you have seen in my CV is that the education part was driven by my dad and the job parts were driven by my friends. So I didn't take any major decision in my life, let alone use any data to do that. It was all based on gut feel of my friends and my feeling that I can trust the gut feel of my friends. So that's the story of the career journey so far.
So exciting that you would say that. I was actually, just when we were discussing about my strategy faculties at IIM Bangalore, I remember having this conversation with Professor Ganesh Prabhu itself, that he was talking about something and he said that by and large all companies, they have already made their decision on the basis of gut feel. They just use data to validate. We were kind of having this debate on whether data, I mean, me being the proponent of all things data analytics, I was trying to convince him that that's the way to make good decisions, and he was saying that that's never the way to make good decisions. And we got into this debate, and I thought, okay, let's try to resolve this right now. So what are your thoughts? What do you think as a leader? Are we making data driven decisions, or are we merely validating the decisions that currently are being made using data that we have at hand?
Yeah, and I think your question is very nice because these days most questions on WhatsApp group or television channels are reduced to a binary question saying, "Is it good or bad?"
Yeah.
There is nothing in between. And I've always felt that there are always 50 shades of gray in anything that you talk about, in gender too, as we know now.
Yes, of
so,
course.
so I think,
52 according to Facebook and going forward.
is it 52 now?
52 according to Facebook.
Oh
Facebook
my
lets
God.
you choose 52 different
This time I remember a couple of
identified
years ago,
genders.
a couple of years ago when I had become the ally in my Wells Fargo LGBT community, I was told there were 32. So clearly that number has
52
gone
now.
up.
Yes.
Good, I will update my.
The world
Yeah.
the world is
So
accepting more and more now, I think.
yeah, and I think at some level we can feel that all of us are unique and different, and categorizing us into buckets for convenience is a good idea, but we need not take that categorization more seriously than what it really is. So I think I have seen both extremes in the past. When data was not available and frankly people didn't have data, so they were so used to taking decision on gut feel, and then data became available, they didn't want to acknowledge it. So I have seen that there is obviously relevance of data. If you have data, you can do a better job. But sometimes data does not tell you anything. In fact, people tell you, I mean, there's this saying that say, oh, everyone, data speaks for itself. And my saying is data never speaks for itself. You have to make sense out of the data. It's like the glass half full or empty or half filled with air or whatever. I think we have to put meaning on that data, and that meaning is put in by our own creativity, in our based on our own maybe biases or whatever that is. So clearly, data is relevant, but beyond that, there is a lot more that we put in as human beings using that data. The same data, one business leader will say, doesn't make sense for me to, let's say, acquire this company or this thing, or someone else may say, will acquire this company. I mean, look at the stock market. People are
Right.
analyzing data like hell in that market, but
Hmm.
still someone is selling and someone is buying. So same data is not making the same decision. And the reason for that is that different people have different goals at different points in time, different motivations, aspirations, way of looking at things, and so on and so forth. So I would think that the same data looked at by different people could lead to different conclusions, and that's fine as long as they know how to take that forward. So that's how
Right.
I look at it. So I think it is useful, but
Hmm.
then it is as good as the user of that this thing, and they have to bring their own other influences also into taking the decision.
Right, right. So, I mean, I always, even in a classroom setup, right, I always find myself telling students that it is just one coin and different sides of the coin. So, without business understanding, an analytical problem is not going to solve itself. And without having the analytical understanding of solving the problem, the business is not going to improve. So, I think one needs to kind of have both and kind of have a clear understanding of both so that you can do it better.
I think
Uh,
also you can also look at it in the in which context. So if you are looking at let's say um, um, investment banking or M&A deals or whatever, where data is very sparse, so it may not be easy to make sense out of 20 M&As on what can we learn from these M&As. But when you're talking about your consumers which are accessing you from a digital mean, I mean there it's all for you to see. So I think in the consumer space, I
hmm.
think it's very hard for anyone to anyway apply any gut feel because you don't know what's going on. I mean, let's say you were the owner of the Flipkart website, and someone were
Mm.
to ask you what are customers doing. I have no clue. I have to look at the data to make any
Yeah.
sense out of it. At the same time, there'll be other areas where you might say, I have a hunch or a gut feel or whatever, because those things are far sparser, and many of those things are not necessarily so much into the detail where you can make some sense. So I think again in the context of the business, amount of data will vary, and we have generally seen that the consumer slash digital areas where just you can't just live without data. But in the
Right,
B2B space where fewer customers, fewer things are there, it's possible for people to have reasonably good gut feel and not necessarily need for that data.
right. But do you believe and this is something that has never been resolved for me, that while while I acknowledge that having a hunch or having a gut feel about where the direction is going to be is important, do you think that will bias your model? Because it's never the data or the model that is biased, it's the modeler that is biased. So do you think that that hunch might actually lead to some inherent bias in the way I design the model?
Yeah, so I think two, three different ways of looking at it. So one is that if you have a many a time we do hypothesis testing. Now, hypothesis is made by me based on my own bias, based on my own assumption, all that. So clearly there is a bias, and now you can call that bias a good thing or a bad thing depending on how good that person is who is making that model, because you can't test every hypothesis. So someone has to find some way of figuring out what are the right hypotheses which are worth testing. So that's one way to say that a bias can be a good thing, because there is someone who is an SME who's telling these are the three, four possible real outcome. Let's test it out versus testing 50 others which may not be relevant. So that's a good way to look at the bias, because I do think that the biases are useful because they have been formed over time based on our own experiences, and we should use it effectively versus not use it. At the same
Hmm,
time, we have also seen the rise of these black box models these days, which
hmm,
don't rely on anything. They're just you throw the data at them and they'll figure something out. I
hmm,
think there the bias is the data that exists. So if you think about the world that exists today and whatever data is there, if we are able to make future projections based on all the data that exists today, then to some extent iPhone wouldn't have been invented, or innovation or totally breakthrough things won't happen. So clearly, if
Right.
you have to do totally new things, they can't be done based on past data. So again, depends on
Right.
what you are trying to do, what you are trying to hedge, what you are trying to predict. So if there is a good set of past data which you are trying to extrapolate and make sense out of it, fine. But if you are going to innovate, try to do something totally radical, then past data may not be a good predictor for you to make that assumption.
Right. I think also our understanding of data is sort of limited. We kind of visualize and look at data in very tabular forms and very numeric forms. But as we were also discussing, right? I mean, if I pick up a good data set from the past and I look at, let's say, a variable named gender, you and I both know that it'll be binary, or at max have like maybe a third category. But as we were just discussing, there's so many more categories. Also, I mean, to sort of take the discussion even forward, now there is so much data that is being generated that is non-numeric data. I mean, my Twitter is my data, my Facebook feed is my data, my the pictures that I click and upload on Google Drive are my data. I mean, there is so much data that is available now. Where do you think us going from there?
I think, and this is something that I had started to think about, or say maybe a decade ago, or at least 6, 7, 8 years ago, that I think the source of competitive advantage for all of us used to be problem solving. Look at how our tests are designed. You are given a set of questions and you answer them. So I think clearly we were giving a whole lot of importance on problem solving skills. And people would say that I'm a great problem solver and all of that, because that was a skill which was very important and very critical, because they were finite problems. And if you could solve them better than the next person, you are a better person. In my opinion, very soon we have moved into a very big space where there are infinite problems, and which problem is worth solving, the choice is a more difficult one than how to solve it. So my broad sort of thematic view is that in future problem solving can get easily automated. There are smart people figuring out all these algorithms. They will make easy. It's very easy to look at how the programming languages have evolved. They're such high level that I can tell Alexa and it will write the code, and I don't need to know coding and stuff like that. And we are seeing the evolution of some of these higher order ways of doing it. But I think this whole creativity and figuring out what is worth solving is where the differentiator might lie. So if I were to design the next question paper in the MBA school, I'll say, whatever subject that is, tell me which are the 5 big problems in this theme that you think is worth solving. And I don't think we are training people in those skills to determine what the right problems are. We are still, overtraining people on the solutioning side, which, I mean, I generally say that will anyway get automated, so why bother? So I do think that we have to
That's
develop more of that critical thinking skill and determining what is worth doing versus how to do it, because that how part is getting easy, because if you can articulate it, if you can put an algorithm around it, someone will automate it.
interesting. That's very interesting. So in that keeping that in mind, that critical thinking is a lot more important than, let's say, the solution bit. How much do you think companies should be paying to build their data capabilities or their analytical capabilities in the future? I mean, how much should they be putting into technology versus how much they should be putting into manpower, which is these critical thinkers actually that actually make decisions finally.
Yeah, and like I said, whenever you say one thing, it doesn't mean that the other is not important. I'm just saying that the one that I highlight hasn't been a big focus area. So I think clearly, even if I define a good problem, it has to be solved. For that solution, there has to be a data, there has to be a database, there has to be a way to solve it, and all of that. So I'm not taking away the fact of all the investment that companies are doing. But my opinion is that people are over investing on the solution space in general, whether in education or in corporates, and somewhere under investing in the determining what is worth solving space. Because that whole thing, both have to be balanced. Only then I think we get the best bang the buck. So I would say that if you have X amount of money and you are investing it in getting the next big machine which can solve problems for you, maybe invest in training your people on what is worth solving versus purchasing that next machine. And that is, every company has to figure out where they are in that journey. But I do think that the understanding the business, asking the right question, some of those things have been under leveraged in the past, and I think there's a need to do that more.
Got it, got it. That's a very interesting thought, I think. And from your experience working with strategies, I think in the last few years you've taken up more strategic roles rather than taking up more tactical roles. So do you think that at that level, when companies are designing their overall corporate strategies, they are actually leveraging these technologies, these analytics, ML, AI, all these technologies at present? Are they leveraging it? And if they are leveraging it, is it giving the kind of payoff that is expected out of these technologies?
Yeah, strategy also is a bit of a I think confused terms or sometimes used in different ways. And so many people say, I want to be in strategy. So to me, strategy is simply thinking about the long term of whatever you're doing. It's just long term thinking, as simple as that. So if you are a supply chain person, you are a manufacturing person, you can be anyone. So the point to me is, do it strategically. Whatever you're doing, don't think of, just next to your nose what you'll do today or tomorrow. Think about the long term. So to me, strategy is no separate thing. Of course, you can talk about larger business strategy or whatever, but strategy, I think, is required by everyone and anyone. As an individual on this call, you should be thinking about your career strategy. And strategy is not something very highfalutin. Thinking about, what do I want to be? How do I want to be? Think about it and make sure that we are not losing sight of the longer term. So to me, that is what strategy is. But many a times, given that the world was quite linear in the past and wasn't changing very much, you could get away by not being strategic in anything that you did. Today, the way the world is evolving so rapidly, I think every individual, wherever they are, they have to be quote unquote strategic, which means they have to be thinking slightly longer term and just can't be thinking about it because things will change. And if you're not thinking about that, you'll miss out on something big that is happening, whether it is about your career, whether it is about your company, your department, your what you are learning, what you identify yourself with. So a lot of people today, that I know in this field, identify themselves as data scientists. My view is, I doubt any of them will retire as a data scientist. Maybe the data scientist job family will not exist sometime later. It will be something else. But I think what will always exist is a business which exists to serve their customers. So I always tell people that a business to serve their customers will always exist. That's not going to go away. It has existed 100 years ago. It will exist 200 years later as well. So figure out how can you continue to remain relevant in that construct, and don't get bogged down by, I'm a marketing person, I'm a data science person, I'm a supply chain person. It's good to be that, and it's nice to be an expert in that, but over time you have to continue to learn and evolve and make a bigger contribution or a better contribution just for your own sanity, and also to make a bigger impact in the place that you are in.
Right. I think it's more to do with how you're generating value for the customer rather
Yeah,
than anything else.
yeah.
So just keeping on track with the last bit that you spoke about, and I strongly resonate. I mean, I when I started, when I was in college, um, data analytics was not really popular. We used to really worry about only getting optimization theory right and scoring in those papers, and then slowly and steadily we self-learned all of these languages like R and Python and got into data analytics per se. But it's nothing but statistics and optimization theory and OR per se put together, and us being able to solve it. So how has this evolution for you been from optimization to analytics to now AI, which is considered a more advanced version maybe of it? So both in terms of what you've carried forward and in terms of how you've been making decisions, how has it been, the evolution?
So if you were to, and I'm just thinking on the fly, if you were to look at put some 50 to 100 people who are in my position, who are, let's say, heading data science team or data analytics team across different companies, I suspect I might be the least skilled person in that field, and probably at the bottom. I don't know whether there's anyone I know in my peer group who knows less than me in this field of data science. And I'm not, and this is just a fact. This is not a any value judgment attached to it. And I'll share with you how I think about that topic. So I think, like I said, that end of the day, you are there to make an impact wherever you are. Over time, I realized that my contribution in the overall team of making an impact will most likely not be in helping them develop a better model or using a better tool. And I found that out by myself. So I try to see what is my strength, where do I create value, and that's what everything I think everyone needs to do. Because many times people say, should I do this course, should I do that course, and all of that. And my answer is, do what you can do best, and for that you have to experiment. So I tried to play golf. I didn't like it. I started running. I liked it. So running is my thing, golf is not. So if we make Sachin Tendulkar play golf or make Tiger Woods play cricket, it won't work. but sometimes we are unable to judge what we are good at. And I think it's not too hard. If we experiment, just like I took the sports analogy, we'll figure out what you are good at. So over time, I tried to see when I was on the data analytics team, even in there, let's say, how do I develop my AI skills? So those days, and maybe even now, there was a popular machine learning course by Dr. Andrew Wang, and someone once told me that it's on Coursera, it's free, and 2 million people have done that. So I said, Acha, I'm also in this field and everyone and their uncle is doing it, and I'm also an IT engineer. I should be able to do it as well. मैं भी कर लेता हूँ यार. At least I'm in this field. I sat there. In an hour or two, I realized that I was just not feeling good about doing what it was. It asked me to download some program, asked me to do some programming and all of those types of things. And I just didn't feel like, learning whatever I was doing. So I left it and didn't do it. So over time, I realized that my value add or what I like doing is in helping other right question, connecting this to the business, making a commercial outcome out of what we are doing and all of that. So my guidance to the team or contribution to the team is all about everything which has nothing to do with data science. And therefore, I try to surround myself with people who are actually experts in that area. So I think the takeaway from this, from my perspective, would be that wherever you are, you will always have to work together as a team. I mean, just like a football team, if you have to score a goal, you have to have a goalkeeper, you have to have a forward, and all of that. So you have to determine what is your position, and it could be whatever it is, whatever you are good at. And now look at what are the other skills that are required. Surround yourself with those skills because together you have to win as a team. You can never win alone. So I don't think any data science team can also be made up of everyone who knows just the same skill. So I seem to be that extremist because of my background that I entered this data science field at a much later date and did not grow up in this field. I mean, I was a consultant and a banker and many other things when I got there. So I didn't develop that experience and I didn't over time find the need to develop that because I didn't like it. So I developed my skills in other areas where I can make an impact.
Right. And I think that goes on for anybody who's technically strong. I think that's what I've realized, that there'll come a point after which, you would possibly be stagnant at technology level, because the rate at which technologies are changing right now. I mean, it was only yesterday that we heard of blockchains, and now we are hearing of decentralized finance and DeFi and AMCs and so on, and so much that I think at that point in time you also realize that all the value, all the things that you've learned so far actually would be contributing much better to the overall performance of the company, rather than doing. Yeah, I totally buy this. I totally agree with
In
you.
fact, I think one of the things that people often ask is how do I form my career and what should my career path be and all of those types of things. So maybe I'll share with you, what I think about that topic. First of all, if you look at my own career path, there was no path. In hindsight, I can fit some dots and make some path out of it, but I was just following my gut feel or my friend's gut feel and doing something where the common theme was that environment was good, that was conducive. I could learn something new. I can create an impact. So I think that was the common theme in all of those things. And they also thought that I could do that. It was not just me thinking that I can make an impact. So that is that. So I think when I look at careers today, I think because there are so many job families, so many opportunities, people get confused on what should it be and what should I be. So I try to dumb it down to say, actually, there are just two careers or two types of jobs that are out there. One which are customer facing or the business facing one, and one which are delivery oriented, which are technical in nature, whatever. So I think over time one can at least at a highest level develop that focus on, am I a product manager or am I an engineer? Just to use the agile team analogy, you are either of the two. You could be both maybe if you are a super person, but many a time you are good at one and not the other. You could be, if you are an all-rounder, that is even better. So if you realize that you are much better with the customer, which is what the product manager role entails, then focus on that, get better at that, and get some counterparts who are good engineers who can counter sort of add to what you don't have. And that's what we find. If you look at startups today, you'll always find two or three founders which complement each other. One is great on the customer side, someone is great on the engineering side who are developing products, and maybe there's a finance guy, whatever. So I do think that it's not as hard. I think with experimentation you can figure out what you're good at, pursue that, and what you're not good at, find a partner, find a colleague or a collaborator, because we won't be good at anything which they are good at. So I think in today's day and age we are finding that it's always the platform, it's always a ecosystem which is succeeding, no one individual or this thing is succeeding. So I think that's what the world is getting to, and it's as individuals also it's good for us to find those collaboration within companies or as starting up companies.
That's an excellent point, and I think that ties very well with one of the questions that a student has raised. And just to give you some context, the students here at Masters Union, they are working on building their own platforms, or they're building their own businesses, small businesses as a part of their curriculum, because we believe that in some forms being an entrepreneur really helps you be a better manager as well. So he's asking that since many of us are building our own platforms, is there any structure that we should keep in mind during the solution architecture phase to help, let's say, scalability and growth in the longer run? And I think one of them you rightly answered: find right partners, right? That is something that they should definitely care about. Anything else that you feel that helps with scalability, helps with growth, especially at for young entrepreneurs, especially at this stage when they are still working on their MVPs, still coming out with things?
Yeah, and like I said, if the question is related to the technical architecture and how I should architect my platform, I am no expert. I can certainly lead you to people who are experts in that. So I think you can certainly reach out to me separately and connect you. But I have no expertise in the technical architecture of any platform. But like I said, I know people who have, and they can help you. I see another question here. I can see on AI and ML
Yeah,
development in the
I
business
think
field.
that's to do with the same discussion that we were having about whether one should trust their intuition versus doing ML and AI. And maybe do you believe that ML and AI help us take better decision? I mean, relatively better decisions than something that we might just take based on intuition.
And I think the answers to those questions are out there in the public domain. I mean, some of you remember that Microsoft had tried to create that Tay, which picked up the wrong thing and started doing something random. So I think the model and the all these things are as good as the data itself. So I think if you are sure that you have fed your model with the right set of data, which is required to do what you need to do, then obviously there'll be a good companion. But as
Hmm,
we have always seen garbage in, garbage out, that in for whatever reason, if you haven't done that, then
hmm,
they can go wrong. So I think this whole AI ML, I think the biggest risk is that while they can create a whole lot of efficiency at scale, they can create a lot of scale, but when go wrong, they can also create havoc at scale. So I think we have
right.
to be very careful on how we use some of these technologies. It's like any other, I mean, frankly, AI ML is another manifestation of a new technology. I mean, if you had, let's imagine, good old manufacturing, you had labor who would do work on manually, and then you had CNC machines, and they
Hmm,
could create 500 pieces in a minute versus five that a manual person will create. Of course, if you gave that machine the wrong die, it can
hmm,
create 500 wrong pieces in a minute also. So it's the same concept that can be applied here, that
hmm.
the phenomena remain the same, that done the right way, they are great efficiency enablers, but done the wrong way, they can also create havoc at a scale. And which is the reason I think this whole ethics of AI and explainability of AI and some of these topics are gaining more prominence. And I think they will continue to gain more prominence to figure out that what we are doing, are we keeping in mind all the other aspects that are required.
Right. What do you think companies are currently doing to upgrade themselves from the ethics standpoint? Because so far, I mean, we have seen that the laws have not been very, very tight on ethical AI practices, ethical data models. So what's your take on that? Can you think of companies from the top of your head who are doing it better than maybe, let's say, some other?
Yeah, I think every company that I know of, I mean, people, big ones like Microsoft and Google and all of them, I mean, they are the most advanced in this, who are doing a good job in figuring some of these things out. But I have a slightly different take also on this topic, which you sort of alluded to, or you didn't ask it, but let me ask that question and also give you my thoughts. I think the way I look at it is, I was a trained engineer, and many people these days are trained engineers. And when we come out of school or college or whatever, the ideas that we come up with, what is worth solving, are a set of ideas. Imagine Zuckerberg, he came out, I think, he was probably interested in girls, and he was not very good at it. So he found Facebook because he thought that will solve his problem or whatever. So each one of us, based on the exposure or stimulus that we have been exposed to, come up with some problems which we try to solve. I think that the lack of some kind of diverse curriculum, especially the liberal type of curriculum in our undergraduate education, limits our ability to think of those problems. So I'm just giving a thought experiment that, let's say, if we had a lot of people who also learned philosophy and literature and arts along with their engineering degree, would they come with the same problem that we are solving today, or might they start to think of problems in a very different way? So like I said, I go back to saying that trying to create a mechanism for people to be able to figure out the right problems, to me, is a bigger issue today than solving it, because like I said, solving is has been has been done well.
Right, and also I think, yeah, the same point that we were sort of discussing, I think, before the call, which is that whether it's the model or the modeler, you have to, you have to be cautious of that. When we look at ethics specifically, I think a lot of, at least in my personal experience, I think why people go wrong is because of the lack of training. They don't know how to build an ethical model, which is why they're not able to build an ethical model. So
Right,
I think, yeah, that's where we go wrong. A lot of it to do with, I mean, data science as a field actually grew so fast that I don't think the um, and this is globally, that educational institutions had the right set of curriculum, or could actually absorb the pace at which this was going to be able to design, which I think holds true for a lot of these other technologies that we are coming up with, right? There's a lack of training, the right training, and therefore people are getting it wrong, possibly.
right. No, absolutely. I think I see a few other questions. Let me take
Yeah,
some. When there is something related to data science and data engineering teams,
yeah.
I can share my current company where I am, or our organization, on how we are structured and why we are structured. Because any structure has to be in the context of where we are, what we want to do, and the structure should address that. So in our company, what we have done is, I mean, so basically we are a sort of an internal consulting type team who are helping many other group companies develop their own data analytics capabilities. So the way we have structured ourselves is to say there'll be analytics consulting team, which is really the data science team. They go solve problem, look at the problem, define the problem, solve it, all of that. And then we have a separate data engineering slash we call the platform team, which try to automate some of those things so that they can be done repeatedly again and again and so on. We actually have a third leg, which is some kind of a training team for those users to also get trained on how to do that. So when my some of the senior people who are not very familiar with this ask me, how is your team organized and how do you do it, and I give them an Excel example, because everyone seems to know Excel, whether they know anything else or not. So I tell them, okay, one of my team goes and sets up your Excel sheet. The other team goes, which is the engineering team, that sets up the macro, and the training team goes and tells you which macro to push and when. So then they understand it. So that is my way of explaining the data science, data engineering, and the training team to some of our lay people in my company.
Right, that makes sense, I think. That makes sense. I think one of the very good questions that somebody has asked, it says that there's so much available, right, in terms of platforms and languages to implement all of the AI and ML technologies that we have right now. How do you choose which one to go for? Is it better to build in-house or to buy something that's already pre-made, or maybe a mix of both? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think this problem of a plenty is facing all of us in almost every sphere of our life. And
Yeah.
I always say that food is also a plenty, and because we don't know how to control it, we become obese. Information is also a plenty, and because we don't know what to read and what not, then we become mad sometime reading all that is going on. So this problem, I think the way I solve it is I look at all of these things as a evolutionary agile sprint. So if all of you and most of you must be familiar with agile and the sprint mechanism, which is to say that you don't know the whole thing, how this will look like, which is what the waterfall used to be, which used to imagine a future world 2 years out, 3 years out, and have a roadmap and make a product. The agile world says that you are responsive to the signals in the market, and you will quickly put it into your backlog. Every 2 weeks you will release some kind of a feature and you will evolve. So that's it. So I would look at this whole make versus buy also as many times actually make and buy, and which is what we do in our own company. So many times, let's say we have a certain thing that we have to solve. So we look at what is the element that is very industry standard. So then we go out and there are startups out there or other companies out there, they've solved it because this is how everyone is. And then there's one part within that which is very bespoke, because we in our company, we do it in a certain way because that's our
Right.
competitive advantage, that is our uniqueness. So that bespoke part doesn't exist outside. So we have to build that on our own. So our strategy has been make and buy. buy what is already available because it is standard. That problem is not unique to you. Everyone else has had that problem forever, and many people have solved it. Pick the best one. There is one unique thing that you are doing which no one is doing. Make that. So that's to me make and buy,
Right.
and then you
Great.
go on. I mean, whatever you did today, that decision might change 2 years down the line, 1 year down the line, whatever. So I think never believe that whatever you did today will remain the same. Just like in the agile way, every 2 weeks you're adding features, the product is evolving. So your thought process also ought to be that agile, that as you
Right.
go forward, you learn from that. And if you made a mistake, I mean, then obviously then you'll have to do some correcting over time.
Absolutely. Also, Mr. Rai, so AI and ML are, of course, your team is using them and extensively using them, and across, I think, industries is very heavily being used at present to make strategic decisions. What are some of these other technologies that you think are going to pave the way in the future? Do you see a lot of other technologies coming up? There's a lot of blockchain NFT technology that we are talking about, especially with Web 3.0. So, what do you think would be the future per se?
I think, and these types of questions get discussed in our group also. So the way we look at is, of course, the one that you said, but we also have a large manufacturing group. So some of these things are on this side, but on the manufacturing side, I mean, 3D printing is a big one, which we talk about and think about because we have invested. So cloud or what cloud did to the data side, I think the 3D printing is doing to the manufacturing side, that you now don't need economies of scale. You can start up something at a very small level. Now it's not very well developed in all areas, but that is an area to look out for. I think quantum is the other one, and I see some questions on security coming over here. But quantum is a big technology that a lot of people are investing in, IBM and so many others, because that can change the whole game of security and computing and so on and so forth. 5G and just the whole network speed, how fast you can process, those areas are there. So like I said, I don't think I can tell you a technology that people haven't heard of. I think these are the same technology that get talked about in most reports that you see. But you have to see which one is most relevant to you and when. I think that is the bigger one. So I think the technologies are out there. Everyone knows which those technologies are. How do you utilize that knowledge and how do you use it for your own company or your own area is where I think the value is.
Understood. Perfect. So to go back to the question on security that you raised, somebody is saying that in terms of security, knowing that the owner doesn't have too much control over data, how do we make it more secure? What do you think companies should be doing to make data more secure? And there's a lot more debate and discussion that's happening around that with the upcoming of newer explorers and everything, where the user kind of gets a little more control over data than the previously centralized places like Facebook and Google. So what are your thoughts on that?
One is the overall data, how it is headed. So we all have been reading about Web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. I think this whole Web 3.0, the future of web is that your data is your property.
Yeah.
And so far you have not gotten any sort of compensation for that, so to say. And I think many of these new technologies, NFTs and others, they're trying to bring that to the fore to say, okay, if your data is being used, you better get a share of that. So I think the world, therefore, I think is some of these technologies are trying to make the world much more equitable, that all stakeholders in the process get the benefit out of it. Because today, Google has all the data and they get the benefit and no one else. But over time, the idea is that all stakeholders who have contributed to it should get their fair share. And I think blockchain and NFTs and many of these technologies are at least able to allow people to get the fair share. So that's, I think, one thing. Now, security is a totally different matter. I think one, of course, everyone is realizing the importance of it. Chief information security officer as a role is becoming more critical in large companies. Most companies are worried that if they lose the data of their customer, they can lose the trust and so on and so forth. So they are investing in that. So I think you can trust all the big companies, small companies, everyone to do that. I think the regulators are doing their bit. They are trying to make sure there are laws, there are ways in which if there is a data breach, there has to be someone in the company responsible for it and all of that. So regulators are also putting a lot of pressure on companies to make sure that they do what they have to do. And I think as customers slash consumers, we have to do our bit. And I can't tell you what you can do which is not available in WhatsApp University, which is just don't be foolish. Don't put all your passwords in one place that anyone can access. Don't make your password so simple that anyone can crack. I don't think I can tell you anything that you don't know, but I do think that a lot of constituents are realizing it. corporations, regulators, and all that. And we need to be, just not be foolish and make sure that we do our bit. Frankly, still things will go wrong, and we know they will go wrong, but we can only reduce the propensity of them going wrong.
No, I love the fact that you said that data privacy or privacy in general is now becoming a part of brand equity in some ways. That people are going to trust the brand much lesser if they don't find data security. I would you like to elaborate on that a little? Some examples, or where do you think that is heading now in terms of how maybe, let's say, security related things will become a big part of how people associate with the brand, or sort of don't associate with brands eventually.
Yeah, and I mean, it has been in the public domain. There was Experian, there was, I think, HSBC. I mean, many big brands have suffered these types of hacks. I mean, no fault of theirs. I mean, every place can have those accidents. But I think if there are companies which perennially have those things and have one too often, clearly, I don't think any of us will trust them. I mean, imagine if your bank came in the news that they lost your data or something. I mean, we'll be the first one to run away from that bank, and bank is the easy one. But even any other company where which let's say even Amazon, where all of us shop, and we suddenly find that our credit card numbers are being sold in the dark web. I don't think we will be very happy with Amazon. So clearly that is something that all of them have realized, and they are working hard on it, because they have a lot to lose if customers flee them. And I'm quite positive that I think some of these things will become much more strengthened, especially because the regulators are also becoming far more harsher for some of these lapses that they may have. So I think a combination of their own reputation with their customers and a regulatory fine are two strong, I would say, incentives for corporations to become much better than what they have been in the past.
But do you also believe that this privacy anxiety that we have, especially in India, is somewhat new, and sort of maybe it sort of got started, especially at least the way I see it, got started quite a lot when Aadhaar happened, and the data started getting collected and people had to really give their thumb impressions, is when people started really feeling that because now my data is in a digital centralized place, is when I might be losing out on data. And before that, I don't think, I mean, growing up, we used to put our thumb to anything, any document. We used to give our signatures out, we used to have photographs out everywhere. Photocopies of literally all our documents used to go even to give our 10th examination, or what, even smaller things than that. But of late, we have been really more worried about data privacy and concerns related to data privacy than we were ever before.
Yeah, so I can give you a range of answers, like I said, in some of these things. So there is this, one, and this is in talking to folks that I know. So the one extreme is, like you said, that people are extremely worried. I mean, which is what I think the Western world has been in that situation, where they set up GDPR and all of that to say we have to be private, all of those types of things. Now, if you in the Indian side, there's again a range of answer. I mean, you look at some of us. People in India have been so casual, like you said, about sharing everything. In fact, we love to ask each other questions. We love to share even our salary with each other and all of those types of things. So as a culture, I think many of our people are quite happy sharing things. They in fact would love to share and love to learn and all of that. So there is that category who says, I don't care, I've been sharing and nothing has happened to me so far. So I think I boil down the risk of any of those things to two things. One is your identity theft, that someone impersonates you and goes and does something wrong, and now you are put in jail. You don't want that to happen. So clearly we have to be conscious of how to guard some of those aspects of our identity which cannot be used by someone in some place and then we get blamed. And two, it could be financial, that someone cleans up your bank account or whatever your saving was. So I think all of us need to figure out what is it that we are worried about, which risk is the most biggest risk, and then to say how do we sort of reduce that risk. So generally saying that I will not share anything with anyone, I mean, to me it doesn't. So I will give you my personal example. I don't mind sharing many things about myself, as long
Right.
as those two things don't happen.
Right.
People should get so much knowledge about me that they can impersonate me somewhere digitally or elsewhere, and then do something wrong, and then I'm blamed, or
Right.
clean up my bank account. As long as I can reduce that. In other places it's okay, if people want to know something from me or something about me, I'm quite open to, happy to give that data to a website or an app or whatever, where I think that it will be in a limited way. That's my
Right.
personal, but like I said, everyone has to determine their own view about risk, and how do you hedge against risk. And the risk appetites will vary from people to people. Many people will be happy to give away a lot of information in return for a favor. which is what
Yeah,
many people did. That you gave all your information to Google because you'll get something free in
right.
return, or to some other company. So I think people will learn, and every individual will learn differently.
That's true. I think, yeah, I mean, as long as data is being used for targeting me as a customer, giving me better recommendations, it's okay,
Yeah,
or something free
yeah,
is okay, but
exactly.
let's say something else is
Yeah,
not okay.
yeah.
One last question before I'll pick questions from the audience, and the audience can write their questions in the Q&A. I was just wondering, as a leader of the industry and as a mentor, how would you advise youngsters? And we've had a long discussion on how things are so dynamic, new technologies. It's almost like, we have to almost be agile in terms of being trained with technologies, because things are changing as fast as, let's say, 2 weeks. What do you advise youngsters? How do they prepare for the current job market? Let's say, a lot of our audience is basically people who are just going to graduate out of their B schools, or are going to enter the markets in another 1 or 2 years. How do they train themselves? What are things that they can do differently? What would be your advice to them?
I think a lot of emphasis has been given in the past and continues to be given today on the hard skills. And I'm not saying hard skills are not important, they are. But I think a lot more will depend on your soft skills, on how do you engage with others. So if, let's say, building an ecosystem or collaboration is critical to success, then how good you are in spotting other colleagues with whom you have to work together, and deliver something together. So those types of influencing skills, persuasion skills, thinking long term, the ability to sort of learn new things on the fly. I think many of those softer skills are often overlooked. I think those will start to play a much bigger role, because mostly everyone will get some possible level of that hard skills. Of course, there'll be some people who are really good in something, and then of course they will shine. But in general, a good supplement of some of these softer skills will be very critical, which I think a lot of people don't pay too much attention to, because one, they're not taught as much in schools and colleges, and two, it's also very hard to measure. How do I know how good you are at influencing? There is no score attached to it, but I can tell you how good you are in machine learning algorithm writing. So whatever gets measured gets more preference. I
Yeah.
think we should focus on things that are immeasurable, like our well-being, our happiness, and all of those types of things. They are very critical. We all know that, but we don't know how to measure it. So I think there are many such skills which are immeasurable. Let's not ignore them.
Got it. Thank you so much. I think now I'm going to read some of the questions from the question box, and maybe you could answer these. Ronak has asked, "What do you think is the significance of advertising and marketing in the long run when you look at it from a strategic perspective, especially when we are looking at AI and ML strategies being used again to also supplement marketing and advertising in some form?"
I think this is a interesting debate sometime that happens, and actually that happens also at a personal level when people say, "I will do my work, and my work will speak for itself." So the
Hmm.
company can also say that I'll build my product, and my product will speak for itself. It's the same thing. I think both of them need to let the relevant people be aware of what they are doing. So as an individual, if you're doing your work and no one else is aware, then there's a problem, because then it's not making an impact. Similarly, if you're making a product and your customers are not aware, then it doesn't help. So clearly, marketing, advertising, all of these things at a personal level or at a company product level have a relevance in terms of making sure that the right people are made aware of what it is, so that they can leverage it. That's the purpose of that existence. So I think clearly they are there, and they will continue to remain relevant. But we have to be more focused on for whom it is relevant. So in the past, I think we could, as we used to call, spray and pray. TV advertising was that you don't know who's watching, what they're doing. But today it has become so targeted that you can be far more thoughtful about it. You can measure it and be better at it.
Another question that I think is pretty interesting is, what do you think will be the future of business consulting, also strategy in general, especially when we are encouraging work from home indefinitely? Do you see a change? Do you think the way people work is going to change?
I think a lot of talk is going about in the metaverse and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you one example about what I am doing in my own team, and then I'll try to extend that idea to others. So, like I said, our team is really a data analytics team, but which helps the Aditya Birla Group, different group companies. There is companies in finance, fashion, steel, whatever, all kinds of different companies, to help become better in data analytics. So my message to folks in my team is that you guys are consulting people who use data to help people become better at taking decisions in their business. Now, for you to be successful, You have to go to the factory, you have to go meet those people, form relationship, form trust. And some of the people that are there, they are in some ways traditional people, and they don't necessarily have embraced some of these technologies. So you got to be with them. And therefore, this is like football. You have to get into the field, wear your shoes and go play. Unlike chess, which is played indoor. So I think many different contexts will require us to figure out what is it that it takes to succeed. So let's say your business is totally in the metaverse. It has nothing to do outside of it. Then maybe you can play around in that way. But let's say your business is totally physical. You are running a factory and you have to make the factory more efficient. It's out there in the field. Then you have to go to the factory and you can't be in the metaverse. So I think the context will drive what is important is. So that is one thing. The other, I think, is that in order for any of us to make an impact, we have to collaborate and we have to influence. I still have my doubts on how you can build trust and collaborate and influence with people that you have never met. So I think that still remains to be seen, because some of us, who have been used to the physical world, I find it far more easier to collaborate and build trust with you when I have met you. We have had some shared experiences. We have worked together. I have seen you operate in a certain way. I've seen your body language. I've seen your reaction, and that those are the cues that make me build that trust and that collaboration.
Right.
Now, how those will play out in that metaverse example that I took, I really don't know, because these are totally new things and we haven't seen it.
Hmm.
So still, I do think that for time to come, for people to be able to build trust and collaboration, they will eventually, want to see each other and be with each other for having shared experiences and things of that nature.
Right.
I think the second thing also is that uh, I think a lot of creativity that is required in the future world requires a lot of brainstorming, which again requires a lot of trust and collaboration. That also, I think, I don't know, it remains to be seen. I do think that people find it far more easier to, be doing it in person, go onto a whiteboard and, debate and discuss. So still all those technologies developed and make us feel that we are next to each other. I do think that there will be a lot of relevance of having these in-person collaboration. How often, how much will depend on the context of your business and your own individual style, I think.
Right. Do you believe, though this is like a more a personal thought than a question, do you believe that trust is important to build efficient teams? Because I would assume that because we are not relying on, sorry to put it more bluntly, but if you take the humanness out of the team, it might actually function more efficiently, more mechanically, and that sometimes might help on more technical sides, maybe.
So it depends. Like I said, if you were to look at a much more broader view of the overall human society, I think trust is the bedrock of any civilization. I mean, the government is all about creating trust, and blockchains and some of these technologies are helping us to create more decentralized trust and so on. So I think trust is very fundamental to any society or any organization. So I don't think that is going away. Now, how do you create trust, and in what situation do you create trust is different, because when I trust you, do I trust you with your Python skills, or do I also trust you that you will look after me if I'm not well, right? So I think trust also has various dimensions.
Right.
So I think we have to all figure out what type of trust are we creating with our colleagues. Mostly with office colleagues, you may not be necessarily creating trust of a much more wider variety, but limited trust. So I think some of those things still have to play out. I think some of us who have lived more in the offline world
Hmm.
build much more broader trust. But I think in future, some narrower versions of trust will play out, like you said. They will make those things much more efficient. And it also depends on your individual personality. Again, I am that Indian fellow who loves to know all about you, not just your professional self, because I feel much better. I would like to engage with you if you have other interests and all of that. So
Right.
I'm that. Someone else could say, hey, I don't care. And I have many Western friends who are very focused, saying, I don't want to deal with you beyond this. This is all I need about you. And as long as you're good at that, that's fine. So I
Yeah.
think those types of things will evolve. I think all kinds of forms are possible, and different individuals will play it out differently.
Right. I think on the matter of trust, we'll take up one last question. Somebody who has made a follow-up question, which is to say that, do you think leveraging technologies is in a way manipulating your customers, or when you're doing too much of a hyper-personalized targeting, are you trying to sort of manipulate their choices? And is that a ethical, and should that be done maybe? I mean, I'm just refining on the question that is asked.
And I think it is no different from parents at home sometimes telling children something that this is this or this is that, and
Like
are
doing
we
engineering, I think.
manipulating them? Are we doing it from their long-term interest and all that? So I think uh, if companies intent is what they will be measured on, and I think intent will not be made evident by one interaction. So if I see that over a period of time that company or that organization is not actually having my best interest at heart, because I saw a few situations where they were selling me something which I didn't need or whatever it is and whatever, then I'll not trust them as well. So I do think that the intent is where how we measure each other. I mean, you and I also will judge each other based on what our intent is, but intent is not easy to judge because it's sitting inside and we are only seeing your behaviors and action. But I think over time people will be able to form an opinion about that intent, and if people are being misguided or misled, I think they will shun those companies or those organizations.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rai. I think this is all the time we had, and I think we had a lovely conversation. So much that I could learn, and so much that our attendees could learn. I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of Masters Union, for joining us this evening and sharing these insights with us. And I hope that we can do this again, hopefully in person and over a cup of coffee, where we could discuss far more details on things that we have discussed now.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you
Yes,
very much. I
thank you
really
so much,
enjoyed it.
Mr. Rai. Thank you.
Okay,
Please take care.
bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for attending, everybody.